Welcome to our Bucky call. Fuller Explanation is the book. Amy Edmondson is the author, and it is October 5th and 6th. And I think it's actually week 10 on this book. We've been spending 10 weeks on the book. And what I love about our conversation is we go back and reread. We take our time, get through it, and share. I just love that instead of just racing through the book. So we're going to start today on Return to Modelability on page 17 is where we're going to be starting from. Richard, how are you feeling and what do you expect to get from today?
Well, it's a good question right now. I'm feeling invigorated, exhausted because I was on the dance floor for quite a few numbers, and I'm realizing there's a difference between dancing at 83 and at 23.
I'm not going to do the math, Richard. I'm not going to do the math. You just keep going with your story.
Yeah. But it's a wonderful evening. This is an annual event that the group of trainers in our system of suicide prevention have been putting on for 29 years nonstop, which is pretty rare to see a group of people that can sort of hold it together that long and organize a really dynamic and fulfilling, meaningful 2 days every year for all those years. It's Newfoundland hospitality. It's I just saw 2 weeks ago the musical Come From Away, which is all about all the airplanes that had to land in Gander, Newfoundland during the 9/11 crisis. And the spirits must have been sort of, or the universe was aligning that particular day that all these planes would be forced to land in the culture of Newfoundland, because they're the most hospitable, fun-loving, caring, reaching out to people in distress that you could ever find. So the play, the musical that was finished in 2011, 10 years after 9/11, captures how all the people that were on those planes were treated by the local people and looked after and cared for, and it's really quite remarkable. And this particular event that I come to every year is always the epitome of the same kind of hosting of not only their own people from this province, but others that come to it. So like this year, we have somebody here from Scotland, somebody from Ireland, Northern Ireland, somebody from Texas, three people from Virginia, and from several provinces in Canada. So it's really a wonderful mix of people. And I was just saying to Joe that one of our longtime trainers has really kind of retired from this event. And she and I have been in dialogue over the years around Bucky's ideas and how we've been using the ideas in the training. So she sent a farewell letter for everybody. And in it, though, she said, I want to make sure that I include a quote from Bucky Fuller to represent the discussions she and I have had. And so she read a quote, which is was very, very invigorating for me. And and it was a bit of an introduction to Fuller that the trainer network seldom get, because nobody really knows in detail the backstory as to how I used the tetrahedron to develop a model that everybody likes. And so it's obviously I'm feeling good, but I may not make it the entire sort of time, because if I go the full time, it'll be 2:30 in the morning, and the next session starts at 8:30. So.
Oh, wow. Wow. Well, if you need to dip out, you take care of yourself.
Yeah.
Cool. And I just must say, it must be wonderful. Just modestly, I'll say that when I started in a 12-step program for adult children of alcoholics, and I got into the program, I did that 12-step thing for 3 years. And then we were continuing on with a support group afterwards. And the dialogue and the opening and closing ceremonies, the language was just so not accountable that I rewrote. Me and a buddy of mine rewrote the guidelines.
Mm.
Changed all the words so they were very accountable. There was, the I pronoun was appropriate when I'm speaking for myself, and we had guidelines like that. When I speak for myself, I use the I program, and they used that outline for like 10 years and nobody knew. I'd go to those meetings, nobody knew I wrote that thing.
Right.
And then for you to have that kind of momentum going in your whole industry, here you are in Alberta, Canada, and here they are in Newfoundland, and you've got all these people from the States and from all over the world coming, and to watch what you did blossom has just got to be terribly rewarding. And I'm honored that you took time to be on the call tonight.
Yeah. Well, it really is. And it's in part, I guess I wanted to share some of that, because since we were discussing Fuller's work, and there was informally sitting around a learning table, or during a banquet, and you can meet people you haven't met before. So there's often a chance to sort of say, do you know the origins of the model, which, as I say, they all love. And I haven't figured out why they really love it, because all I've done was we placed 3 of the tetrahedron triangles sort of together in a row. It's almost like the bottom row of the 2-dimensional tetrahedron, and we took the top one and just sort of folded it in behind, or could have been over to one end, and so we could have had a 4-phase model instead of a 3-phase. But somehow or another, I think it's that there's a difference between having laid out the process in triangles rather than in little squares or rectangles.
Yeah.
And even though they don't understand anything, I mean, as far as many people are concerned, well, these are 3 triangles. But I think that the triangles modeling is communicating something that a rectangle or square set of phases wouldn't or doesn't communicate, because they all say this is such an intuitive type of modeling, and almost to a person, they'll tell you that how much they like it. In fact, I was sitting for breakfast with 2 people who were brand new. And so I was asking them, why do you like the model? I mean, what's it say to you, and why and they started off by saying, well, I've never really thought about why I like it. And then they started thinking about it, and one finished up and she said, well, it's just so intuitive. It just sort of tells you almost like in an instruction book that you start at this point and you do this, and then you go to another one, and then you go to another one, and each one modifies the next step in the process without sort of telling you in a written word.
Yeah.
And so that was confirming for me today, this idea that there's something about the triangles that communicates a way of working through something that other kinds of geometric sort of forms wouldn't do. And so, yeah, it's really fascinating because everybody talks about the model in that way, and they see it in the wireframe. In other words, if you strip down all the content that we put on it, they see it and say, well, I could strip the information off it and I could reload it with something else, that the kind of work that they're doing. And so they say, I think this model can be used in different domains or different subject areas. And I always like that because it's showing what I think about nature's coordinate system, that it's an underlying structure, and so it's common to everybody, and yet people manifest different trees, different forests, different sort of human behaviors off of it. So it actually captures that yin yang of commonality and diversity all in one. Yeah.
Very, very cool. I have a little more to say, but I'll wait till my intro. Are you complete?
Yeah, I'm complete, and yes, pass it on to you or Joe. Yeah.
Joe, go ahead.
Sure. It's great to be here. It's one of those things on a Saturday night that it doesn't feel right unless we are here. I'm just looking forward to getting a little bit more out of this session, the idea of modelability. I think as we think a little bit more about that, it's to me is there's a certain degree of coherence. And so that not a certain degree, there is a coherence to it that allows us to be a little bit more mindful of both our words and our actions. So, and I had a really interesting experience with that this week in particular. And so as far as being kind of relying on the framework that I'm using for as a way of living, and just kind of letting go and abandoning myself a little bit. So that's a model, though. That's what it comes down to. It's a model what you have of your daily life, and it's choosing words carefully, and how everything works within the system. And we always don't see the immediate benefits that we get out of these, sometimes the way we act. But I did in this particular instance, and it was really cool to see. So again, when I think about modelability, I think about how we manage ourselves and respond to events, in our lives. And how those events lead to both personal change and change for the people around us. So yeah, so I'm looking to really kind of go into this, and again, I'm grateful that we have this book to read. Steve, how you feeling? What do you want to take away from today?
Well, I'm really delighted to be here. And Joe, everything you just said, I mean, isn't this interesting? Here you're talking about models and ways to structure thought and life. And we're returning, that's our topic tonight, return to modelability. And Richard just shared with us how he created this model using these triangles and how it's been adopted by his organization. And everybody likes it. Nobody's quite sure why. You know, it just seems to make sense. I mean, now, because I'm so exposed to this thing, if you show me a rectangle, I know that it will fall over if you push on it. But if you show me a triangle, it don't go anywhere. You know, it's right there. It's just as solid as can be. And then to know that Native Americans built their teepees, they actually built a tetrahedron. It's actually, they crossed up with two, came up with the back. It's a tetrahedron. And then they put poles around it to make it more spherical. But it's a tetrahedron. And then even the sweat lodge, the way they did that was they took giant willows and they bent them over each other just like great spheres.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just amazing. And of course, they kind of understood that. Joe, you're muted. They kind of understood that in a spiritual sense, in a way that white people, I don't think Westerners ever got what was going on, you know?
No.
It's amazing.
Right.
Have you guys, and I noticed that arrowheads, axes are more square, but they're usually even triangular. Axes are triangular, and arrowheads are triangular. They get to the point. Have you guys heard "They Must Be Giants"? Triangle Man. Have you ever heard this song? Because as you spoke, I thought, my gosh, Richard, you're talking about Triangle Man. So here are the words to the song right here, and I'll put them in the chat. And then, but here's the word, the Triangle Man. It's a very short song. Here we go.
Oh, wow.
Here we go. Triangle Man. Okay, now one.
Particle man, doing the things a particle can. What's he like? It's not important. Particle man, is he a dot or is he a speck? When he's underwater, does he get wet? Or does the water get him instead? Nobody knows. Particle man. Triangle man, triangle man. Triangle man hates particle man. They have a fight, triangle wins. Triangle man. Universe man, size of the entire universe man, usually kind to smaller man. Universe man, he's got a watch with a minute hand, millennium hand, and a crown hand. And when they meet, it's a happy land. Powerful man, universe man. Person man, hit on the head with a frying pan, lives his life in a garbage can. Person man. Is he depressed or is he a mess? Does he feel totally worthless? Who came up with person man? Degraded man, person man. Triangle man, triangle man. Triangle man hates person man. They have a fight, triangle wins. Triangle man.
So here are the words. Oops, where are the words? The words are here somewhere. Where did I? Oh, maybe they're in another. Here they are. Okay, particle man, doing the things a particle can. What's he like? It's not important. It's particle man. Is he a dot or is he a speck? When he's underwater, does he get wet or does the water get him instead? Nobody knows. Particle man. Triangle man hates particle man. They have a fight. Triangle wins. Triangle man. Universe man, size of the entire universe man, usually kind to smaller men, universe man. He's got a watch with a minute hand, millennium hand, and an eon hand. And when they meet, it's happy land. Powerful man, universe man. Person man, hit on the head with a frying pan, lives his life in a garbage can. Person man. Is he depressed or is he a mess? Does he feel totally worthless? Who came up with person man? Degraded man, person man. Triangle man hates person man. They have a fight, triangle wins, triangle man.
Oh, wow.
I will put, I'll put that in the chat so you guys have the word.
Yeah.
In fact, I'll probably put I'll put the lyrics just below. So here comes the link to the lyrics. And then let's just give you the lyrics here. And then I'll put the link to the audio. So that
Yeah, that's quite exciting. One of our colleagues back in the 80s who came originally from Wisconsin, an American Indian woman, in 1989, she organized what she called the World Indigenous Science Network. And she deliberately called it science and not knowledge. And she and I were colleagues around the same time I was introducing or trying to introduce Lucky's ideas into the classroom. And most people made fun of me because I carried around triangles.
Sorry, hang on, hold on a second. Okay, there we go. I'm sorry, I had a technical blow up here. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I say most of my other colleagues sort of made fun of me carrying around triangles and tetrahedron models. But she gave me the label triangle man. And she did it in my own mind anyway, with reverence. And another time I was using the three-dimensional sort of tetrahedron model, and I was talking to a group of people working in child welfare, and some were indigenous and some were non-indigenous. And you could tell that the non-indigenous person was lost. They were rolling their eyes at what I was trying to explain about the tetrahedron. And when we went out for lunch, one of the indigenous child welfare workers caught my attention as we walked through the door into the lunchroom, and she whispered in my ear. She said, "I get it. That's how we think."
Wow. Kind of intuitive, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Closer to nature.
Yeah, totally amazing. Totally freaking amazing.
And what I surmised out of that when I thought about it is that if I take the model like we developed and lay it down so it looks like a linear model, so it looks like it's sort of step 1, step 2, step 3.
Yeah.
The sort of non-indigenous European white American, kind of person, they get it because they've been taught how to think in that kind of logical way.
Right.
And they can't get their head around a three-dimensional version of it. And as the young woman that whispered in my ear, she very quietly understood it right from the beginning. And she didn't make a big to-do about it in the group, but she wanted me to sort of know privately that she understood. So I surmise from that if I'm working with the indigenous culture and I give them a three-dimensional model, they'll get it. And when I work with the non-indigenous people, I have to turn it into a two-dimensional model, and they'll get it. And then eventually it can be say, you guys don't really know, but you actually are grounded to the exact same model. It's just presented to you a little bit differently, or it's written a bit differently. So you really are in common and not sort of in opposition to each other.
Right.
Yeah.
See, and it's so amazing to me learning about the tetrahedron, how all the nodes connect to all the nodes.
Yeah.
And that's the very definition of a hypergraph,
Yes.
Right.
which is four-dimensional geometry. And here's
Right.
Bucky talking about it in 1985, or developing it over the years and finally writing these books in 85, 86. He never mentions four dimensions. He talks about his tetrahedron, how everything connects to everything, and then he gives his n squared minus n over 2. I mean, there's the formula for a hypergraph right there. And that's a big thing, and it's a big thing in physics today, is hypergraph. Stephen Wolfram's whole concept of automata and the nature of the universe is all based on hyper connection. Everything's connected to everything. My gosh, it just blows my mind.
Yeah.
So anyway.
No, I think that's a really important point in general. Is that, one of the things that I feel like when we're reading Bucky, is that sometimes the technology that in order to people to kind of see his ideas a little bit more clearly has to come into being, if you will. And I think that's kind of where we are with some of our abilities to model things that we've never been able to model before. And where we're going to see more connections between things. So, we could model them, using the jitterbug, having different ideas and demonstrating the connections between things. But I think that as the virtual world and the digital world becomes much more ingrained or intertwined into our daily lives, that those ideas are going to become a little bit more mainstream and more accessible. I really believe that firmly.
It's like we're becoming more and more aboriginal because we're coming out of that two-dimensional reality.
I think what we're doing is something that's needed to be done for a very long time, and something we still have to work at, is that we're recapturing the past and while still moving into the future.
Yeah.
And so I think that's one of the really important points as we actually start to see a lot of new technologies come online.
Yeah.
It's kind of getting closer to nature.
Yeah.
We've gotten so separated from things like our food. We've gotten so separated from things like each other.
Yeah.
That as we get a little bit more in tune with those things, I think we'll have a deeper appreciation for Aboriginal people, as well as the technologies that help us see those connections.
Yeah. Very, very cool. You kind of inspired me, but let's tackle the book. And unless you have a comment, Richard.
No, I'm just trying to bring in my computer, so I may end up cutting out of my phone for a minute and then onto the computer.
Right on.
Sure.
I'm switching programs here. I'm doing something a little different. Hopefully it'll be cool. Is that readable for everybody?
It is for me, not as long as you get rid of that. Yeah.
Okay, now is it good?
It's fine. Yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah, okay, great. I don't know how to get rid of that bar right there.
I wouldn't worry too much about that.
Okay, good. Let's see if there's a remove the bar here. No, there's no remove the bar. Okay, good. We're going to start here with return to modelability, as if we already haven't been talking about it.
That's right.
Oh boy. Oh, Richard's coming in on his computer right now. So let's rotate reading. Joe, you want to start?
Sure.
Then pause between each paragraph. Give us a chance to chime in and
Sure.
and
No
go
worries
for
at
it.
all.
Thank you.
Okay, return to modelability. Synergetics is a product of Fuller's passionate concern with models. Concerned that society's ignorance of science and is seriously destructive, he devoted years of thought to ways of alleviating this ignorance. In the 20th century, we suddenly find ourselves confronted with an invisible atomic reality in which the average person understands very little about how things work. Although confronted daily with incredible technology, which to Fuller includes the natural phenomena of universe as well as the ever expanding inventory of human invention, the vast majority assume such phenomena to be out of their reach. Fuller attributes this widespread discomfort to both the invisibility of science and the devastatingly complicated mathematics, without which scientists claim their findings cannot be described. The dangerous chasm between scientists and lay people, which the truth guarded by an elite few and the rest resigned to ignorance, thus seems inevitable.
Cool. Here comes Richard. So he's talking about the dangerous chasm between scientists and lay people. And that brings me back to the thought that I was thinking as you guys were talking about, we're getting more and more integrated, we're learning models, and that as technology progresses, we're coming more and more out of that two-dimensional reality. There are myths over time that talk about the last days, and in the last days, it would be a fullness of times. So like everything would be restored. And that's about what you said, Joe, when you talked about the technology going. Any other
Correct,
comments or
yeah.
questions? Yeah, any other comments or questions? Okay, want to read some more?
Sure. The origin of this troubled state of affairs, an incorrect mathematical system. Long ago, human beings surveyed this environment and, seeing a never-ending flat Earth, decided upon cubes and orthogonal planes as the appropriate measuring system. Today, says Fuller, we're still stuck with that uninformed early guess. And as a result, nature's behavior has seemed irrational, perverse, and difficult to describe because we're using the wrong kind of yardstick. With accurate models, he claims this gap can be closed. The purpose of synergetics is to make the invisible events and transformations of universe visible through tangible models that elucidate the principles behind our energy event universe. Human beings will thereby be able to coordinate their senses with a new understanding of reality. Synergetics is full of tantalizing models. The difficulty comes in assigning them to aspects of physical reality. However, a number of notable examples in which a newly discovered scientific phenomena is described by one of Fuller's previously developed models suggest that there may be many more such successes to come. The immediate goal, therefore, is to unravel and study the geometric system itself.
And by the way, Stephen Wolfram with this automata thing is all back to, and Donald Hoffman, physicist, philosopher, they're all talking about how underlying quantum reality, which doesn't apply past like 10 to the minus 44 or 10 to the plus 44, beyond that's the macro. Our current sciences don't apply, and the minus, our current sciences don't apply. And Stephen Wolfram says under that and over that is the amplituhedron, which is very interesting. Sounds to me like a cube octahedron ready to roll. Any other comments or questions before we move ahead?
I just think some of these things, again, this idea of accurate models, that's a little bit kind of what I was referring to a little bit before as well. I do think that these models are going to become increasingly accurate. But we also have to always keep in mind about the unseen and what is not seen, even as we move towards quantum computing.
Yeah.
and the ability to model things, and something that I actually I've been meaning to lead a discussion on. I had posted was the digital twins, and we had talked a little bit about that here in the past, but just how to we're going to be able to quantify a lot of things to a level that we haven't been able to quantify before, and that ability is it's gonna provide us new insights. But it's also going to give us new ways of thinking as well. And I think that this is where some of the modeling and even the philosophical approaches are going to be that much more important. Specifically understanding the unseen.
Right on. Any comments, Richard? We'll just keep rolling. Richard, are you up to reading? Yo, Richard, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Are you up to reading? You don't have to if you're at the end of your wick and you want to relax.
Yeah. No, I'll start off here.
Good.
We're now into number 2, chapter 2, the irrationality of pi. Young Bucky Fuller seems to have been haunted by pi. Discovering that the ratio of a sphere's circumference to its diameter is an irrational number, commonly referred to by the Greek letter pi, was perhaps the most disturbing of all geometry's strange lessons. Just as he could not imagine where its accomplice in deception, the infinite straight line stopped, Bucky could not let go of a vision of thousands upon thousands of digits trailing after 3.14159 blah, 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 spelling out the classroom window and stretching absurdly to the next town and then further, never allowed to stop. He has told the story countless times, each rendition sounding like the first with an air of revelation. He happens to be standing by the ocean, so much the better, because he's bound to talk about the foaming waves. Look at them. Look at them all, he marvels. Beautiful, beautiful bubbles, every one of them. Bucky recalls that growing up near the ocean gave him plenty of time to think about the structuring of these bubbles. Looking back at the wake trailing behind his boat or standing knee-deep in breaking waves at the shore, he saw the water continuously being laced with white foam. Its whiteness was created by vast numbers of tiny air bubbles, each one suddenly formed and merging at the water's surface. And he says, how many bubbles am I looking at? Bucky would ask himself. Fantastic numbers, of course. He could not help wondering if each and every one of those spheres involves pi. To how many digits does nature carry out the irrational pi in making one of those bubbles before discovering that it can't be completed? At what point does nature stop and make a fake bubble? And how would the decision be made? In meetings of the chemistry and mathematics departments, how would the decision be made in meetings of chemistry and mathematics departments? The young Bucky concluded, I don't think nature's making any fake bubbles. I don't think nature is using pi. It is decidedly amusing. It's a decidedly amusing image. Nature gathering department heads, nature consternation over fudging the numbers, getting away with imperfect bubbles. And it's through such deliberate personification that the ideas become memorable. The story of a young man looking out from his ship carries a deeper message. Fuller uses this particular event, even assigning a time and a place, 1917, on a US Navy ship, as a moment of revelation, the threshold of his consciousness search for nature's coordinate system. The scene is bait to draw us in, make us as curious about nature's structuring as that young sailor was. It works. If he had started on a heady discourse about mathematical concepts versus natural structures, his audience might have walked away. It's important to realize the nature of his rebellion, not to challenge the theoretical numerical ratio between the circumference and the diameter of the ideal sphere, but rather to challenge that sphere to materialize. Irrational numbers don't belong in tangible experiences. It is a question of sorting out the demonstrable from the impossible, and then developing models based on the former. Essentially, Bucky is choosing not to play with pi, posing the question, why shouldn't mathematics deal with experience? So the heading is nature isn't using pi. Nature can have no perfect spheres because she has no continuous surfaces. The mathematician's sphere calls for all points on its surface to be exactly equidistant from the center. This sphere, explains Fuller, has no holes. It is an absolutely impermeable container sealing off a section of the universe. A perpetual energy conserving machine defying all laws of nature. The illusion of a physical continuum in any spherical system is due to the limitations of the human senses. On some level of resolution, all physical solids, in quotations, and surfaces break down into discrete particles. A magnifying glass uncovers the tiny dots of different colors that make up the pure, again in quotes, blue sky in a magazine photograph. And as a microscope, if it could be set up in the sea, would reveal that nature's bubbles are all likewise fragmented, consisting of untold numbers of discrete molecules located approximately equidistant from an approximate center. If such a phenomena could be precisely measured, we would find out that the ratio of a bubble's circumference and diameter is some number very close to the elusive pi. But the point, says Bucky, is that the bubble differs from the Greek ideal. A physical entity is necessarily demonstrable and finite, while an irrational number such as pi is just the opposite. A real sphere consists of a large but finite number of interconnected individual energy events. A large but finite number of interconnected individual energy events. Or that isn't the hypergraph. Moreover, the middle of each of the implied chordal straight line connections between events is slightly closer to the sphere's center than the ends, thereby violating the mathematical definition and ensuring that some small departure from the ratio pi. Any cross-section of this sphere will be not a circle, but a many-sided polygon. Likewise, the most perfect circle, where did I go here?
Sorry.
I don't know, did we lose Richard or did we lose the page?
Richard, your video just dropped off.
Am I okay now?
No, your video is not present.
Oh, my video, yes. There we go. Likewise, the most perfect looking circle.
There we go. Likewise.
Likewise, the most perfect looking circle, carefully drawn with a sharpened pencil and accurate compass, will appear fuzzy and fragmented through a good magnifying glass. The most precise ball bearing is imperfect, a good approximation of pi, but always imperfect. With bizarre mountains and valleys dramatically visible after 5,000 times magnification. In chapter 15, we shall examine the specifics of one alternative model for the mathematician's impossible sphere.
Cool.
Fake
Yeah.
bubbles.
I mean,
Any
I think,
comments at this point?
yeah, I mean, I just think there's a lot that's been covered there.
Yeah.
With, rational and irrational numbers and how they actually factor into nature. But I think that there's something that's even more fundamental, is we're starting about model, we're just talking about modelability a moment ago. And this is where fundamentally, if you just take what we've just read, is Bucky's willingness to do away with older models. But this fits into a deeper point that he often makes. When he talks about creating a new system, in particular, to overtake the old one. And I think that that's something that's one of those essential things, that it's not, this is a learning through experience, clearly, right? But this experience, and how it's captured in the understanding overall, is the foundation of his works. And I think that's what Amy's really saying here, is that it's important to understand, obviously the fundamentals of rational and irrational numbers, but even more important is what he's actually accomplishing with his approach, and how this maps into something bigger and more coherent. And more in line with understanding nature itself. And that's beauty. I think that's actually beauty. I mean, in a sense. Yeah, so there is something where we can talk about what beauty actually is. And I think it's also this idea of capturing reality, and appreciating it in its fullest form, as opposed to I don't know, coming up with our own approach to impose pretty much our perspective on nature, as opposed to actually working within it.
Cool. Any other comments or questions? I love the ball bearing idea.
I always remembered that from, what was it, Fletch? I don't know if anybody's ever seen that movie, but anyway, go ahead. That's the first thing that came to mind when I heard ball bearings.
Really?
It's a great scene. Maybe I'll find it and put it in the chat.
Fletch is Chevy Chase. I don't remember the
It
ball
is.
bearing scene. Yeah.
Oh, it's a great scene. I mean, I haven't seen it since I was a kid, but as soon as that came up, it's
Cool. Okay, I'll read for a little bit if that's okay. Fake bubbles led to further contemplation about pi. Nature is always associating in simple whole rational numbers. Though Bucky, H2O, never H pi O. Irrational numbers do not show up in chemical combinations of atoms and molecules. Clearly, nature employs one coordinate omnirational mensuration system. None of this is new information. Any one of us could have thought about it for a while and understood, of course, that pi does not play a role in the making of bubbles. what happens is that the turbulence introduces air into the water, and the air is so tight that it floats toward the surface to escape. It's an easy problem of getting the most air in each pocket with the least surface area of water, pushing it to collapse the bubble. A spherical space allows the most volume per unit of surface, as we shall learn in later chapters, providing the most efficient enclosure for that air. Nature is exquisitely efficient. But even if we did contemplate this mystery at the seashore, we probably didn't bother to take our children aside and explain to them before they became perplexed and frustrated by the never-ending pi in their mathematics class. If nature's lack of employment of pi isn't news, why does Bucky persist? Why use his own considerable but still finite energy to lecture tirelessly on the subject for half a century? The answer lies in the fact that our education and popular awareness fall short of the mark. Fuller felt that society did not sufficiently emphasize this discrepancy between theoretical games and real structures. We introduce solids to school children long before they learn the real story about energy event reality. Why, that is powerful. If humanity is to feel comfortable with science, argues Fuller, education must present accurate models in the first place. The message behind the bubble story is, why not tell the truth from the beginning? I'm keeping track of that place. Why not tell the truth from the beginning? He calls for widespread recognition for discrete energy events, a reality that cannot be perceived by human senses. Wow. Do I like that? I've already, go ahead.
Well, it just, that sentence really caught my eye because I mean, as soon as I hear that or read it, I quickly then move over to his other argument with the scientists of saying, why don't you call a sunset and a sunrise what it really is? And so, and maybe this is something in it's a kind of dialogue with Joe, is that all of a sudden that sentence, why not tell the truth in the first place, sounds to me like it's a generalized principle. Does that make sense in terms of what we understand around the meaning of a generalized principle?
You're asking if what we're reading as far as telling the truth would be a generalized principle that well, I mean, the truth is about
it's the question that he's raised. Why not tell the truth from the beginning? Is that a generalized principle?
I
well,
like it.
Yeah,
It's
I mean,
true in all cases. A generalized principle is true in all cases.
Correct. That's true. And yeah, so I mean, this is just recognizing patterns. But I think what this is actually really what we're practically dealing with here is once something's adopted, how difficult it is to supersede something, even though it may be true. And that's really you obviously see that in various belief systems. Try telling somebody that believes something different than they had actually, so then what how they perceived reality or been told reality works. So this idea of understanding even widespread recognition of discrete energy events, a reality that cannot be perceived by the human senses, and just even understanding that means. Most people don't even want to think about those things in those terms.
Yeah, so
Um,
what it
so
did to me was, in a teaching context, is that, oh wow, that would be interesting that we on the blackboard, sort of in bold print, you write down, why not tell the truth in the first place? Then we go to a book or a textbook or somebody presents, and so they present on pi, and they go through the mathematics of pi and so forth. And then somebody who is knowledgeable of Bucky's sort of bubble idea, then they tell the story of the bubbles,
mm,
and begin to show that contrast. And then at the end, in a sense of coming back to the opening statement of saying, so to you, the student who's in this learning environment, isn't it interesting? Why didn't we, or why didn't I, even as the instructor, present the truth in the first place? In other words, why did I go through this pi
but it's me.
discussion if the truth really was the other?
Well, yeah. There's also the aspect of it is that other people may not even actually understand. The teacher may not understand the truth himself. He or herself.
No, but
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
assuming they do understand it.
Okay, well, that's yeah,
And-
because I think that there is something fundamental there. I mean, there's a very interesting story by again, and I've spoken about this many times. This idea of cultivating ignorance and the idea of Stuart Firestein, and we've talked about this with Anne as far as kind of our learning. And essentially, it was a student had a question. About how many neurons there were in the brain, and that they've been using this number that was in this in almost every textbook, and it was a student from Spain, I believe, and that nobody had an answer where the number had come from. And this is at a very, very high level. I mean, we're talking about Columbia University doing neuroscience and some pretty high level people. And what I'm saying is that we're often rewarded for regurgitation. We're not rewarded for questioning. And so why not teach it? Sometimes I don't think the teacher always knows. I think the teachers actually sometimes are just regurgitating what they've been fed, and may not be questioning
Yeah,
things the
well,
way
I
Bucky, and
think,
this
and
gets
that was,
back to this is getting back to what I was saying a little bit earlier, is when Bucky's talking about replacing the old system, you actually do have to understand the old system and replace it with something better, right? So that requires a certain cultivation of asking questions about why things exist in the first place, and not many people are really willing to take that, kind of engage in that conversation, for the exact reason where I started, is their belief systems themselves are going to be upended, and that could be as true as with religious beliefs as well as professional.
well, yeah, but my interest here is that, and not to you directly, but saying that particular sort of presentation is, defending the status quo. And
Oh
what
no,
I
I
would
don't
look,
mean to be
no,
doing
no,
that.
no, no,
I'm just explaining as to why it is.
no, I know you are. That's why I'm saying that
Yeah.
this is not directed to you. It's directed to the idea that you would explain something that way, whereas the person, as you say, I was assuming the person is knowledgeable, and so they're using it as a teaching point. So they start out with the question, why not tell the truth in the first place? And then they present, if you want, the falsity that's maybe in a textbook or where it might be, and then they present what we were just looking at. And then at the end, when the student kind of figures out, well, the latter information is is more correct. And so they might even be bringing it up to the teacher that says, so why didn't you tell that to us in the first place? Why did you go through this other falsity? And so the student ends up walking, the learning out of the class, I would hope then would be a student comes out of the class, not with this, as you say, regurgitation information, but they come out of the class with this sort of Socratic question that says, wherever I am, I'm going to say, why don't we tell the truth in the first place? And start off from that kind of basis.
I love
Agreed
it.
with you. Yeah.
I love it. I have 2 examples that I'm using, and I just developed the second one for my book. My first example was a person walks up to the river of truth, the lake of truth. The water is still and beautiful, and the person looks down in and sees so clearly the bottom of the lake and the truth of the lake, and gets all excited and starts dancing around the outside edges, and pretty soon they're stirring up mud. And then they invite their friends over to look at it, and it's all screwed up because they were dancing around it. The example I thought of this time is like, well, the language I'm using is muddy. It's not pure, it's not clear, but it gets the point across. Trouble is, if I walk through the mud long enough, I slip and fall on my butt. And when I walk out of the mud and into a room with the mud on my feet, that room will never be the same. That goes everywhere. And I think this is such a powerful argument for speaking the truth and giving things names that actually fit what the thing is, like sunsight, and sun clips. If I allow my brain to use a sloppy metaphor, my brain is kind of stuck in that mode. It's like I got mud in my shoes. So I walk into a room and there's proof that there's mud, because there's mud on the floor, but of course it came off my feet. I brought it in with my feet. Anyway, I'm working on that. I think this telling the truth is so critical. I mean, the whole idea of a good meditation is vipassana, for example, is to see the truth the way it really is. Okay, now I've seen the truth the way it really is. If I don't say the words that describe the truth the way it really is, I'm just muddying up the picture, Go ahead, Joe.
I mean, there's 2 things that we're actually really kind of getting to. Is one of them is having utterances, if you will, words that actually accurately capture reality, right? So there's that aspect of it. How, these concepts that are actually going to capture something, because obviously that speaks to the heart of modelability, right? Because if you're speaking about things that don't necessarily accurately align with reality, the ability to infer about anything becomes impaired. So that's what kind of Bucky is actually really getting to here, is that it's not just the fact that we're not that we're not being honest with our kids. It's impairing our ability to how we actually infer about the world, about what is possible. So I think that's a really important, important point when we're talking about how having words that, kind of accurately depict reality. Now, there's the other aspect of it is I think that we do have to at least look at this compassionately. To some degree. It's not easy to say I don't know. Once you do prove something, even if it is a particular and not a generalized principle that you've been able to come up with, a lot of people probably like to prove their point. So kind of saying, well, we don't know, or dismissing new ideas. I don't think that that's new, but I do think, and this is the final point I'll make, is I think that when I say a lot of these ideas are actually coming to fruition, I do think education is reaching a point with the tools that we do have, where it's going to mean a hell of a lot more to be able to ask a good question than it will be to regurgitate an answer. And so I think we're really at that point. If I were to say that that was one thing that AI will do, is it will, it's going to force us to prompt it at the very least in a way that we're actually getting information. And even if we're prompting it, it's the ability to kind of formulate that question that I think is, we're going to truly kind of start to look at the value of things like Socrates.
And Joe, everything you're saying is so applicable with AI today.
Oh, it is. Yeah.
There's now a science on how to create a prompt.
Oh, yeah.
There's AI out there with all this resource of information, and what they're finding out is the way you ask the question determines what kind of answer you get. And if you ask a muddy question, you get a muddy answer. And so now in the AI, they're building in layers of prompts. So you can start out and it gives you certain key points. Then you can specify and get more clear, closer to reality. Everything you're saying is so appropriate today. And I think within 10 or 15 years, learning how to ask the right question is going to be really critical. And it's going to be obvious. You know, that's what Einstein said, right? If I had an hour to solve a problem, I'd take 55 minutes to find out the right question, and then I'd solve the problem in 5 minutes. He said something like that.
And this is the precision and the simplification that we've been talking about this whole time, you know, for weeks, months. Simplification in the sense that you have a precision with your words that actually accurately depict reality so that you can properly prompt something in order to get the information that you want. Now, I do think AI will actually be beneficial in many ways in helping us get to that point where we're reconciling those terms and concepts. I think one of the first things I've always thought of is AI, where it could actually is going to make a really big difference, organizationally speaking, is reconciling the contradictions in policies and procedures, as well as actually in contracts in particular, that these contracts are actually going to have terms that are able to be clearly articulated and delineate these distinct boundaries where you're going to be able to hold accountable somebody to what they say, because a lot of times I'll read multiple contracts and they'll say one thing in one instance and something in another. And this is the same organization. This is in this something. This is not even, we're not even talking about cross-organizational or cross, disciplines. Oh, I mean, anyway, multiple companies, is what I'm saying. Entities, if you will. Yeah, no, I think that that's one of the areas that actually AI will have an immediate impact, is actually removing a lot of the contradictions that we've created, as well as a lot of the unnecessary or unclear language that is involved in a contractual agreement between two parties.
Cool. Is that clip on Fletch worth playing? It's 4 minutes.
No, it's definitely not. But it's just the fact that it says it's all about ball bearings is it's just it's foolish actually. It's a little bit. It's just kind of tongue in cheek, but
so was my Triangle Man tune. It was kind of tongue in cheek, but I thought it was cool.
It was cool. It's not 4 minutes though.
Oh, that's right. It was 2 minutes, 10 seconds.
If it was 2 minutes and 10 seconds, I'd say go for it. But I mean, this is definitely not that. So,
okay. Any thoughts, Richard? Are you complete, Joe?
I'm good.
Okay, good. Richard, any thoughts?
Yeah, no, just going back to what I was saying before, it was like, and again, I'm just thinking it through in my own head, but it's saying if the why not tell the truth in the first place is the question, that's put in front, and then whatever the lecture covers, presumably sort of different variations of what is said to be the truth, whether it's from a textbook or something else.
Yeah.
And then at the end, it's like again, you're using a slightly different kind of Socratic question, but you're turning it back and saying, okay, was the truth told? Or you could even stop at each one and at the end of it say, was the truth told? And in the first instance, if you were presenting on, let's say, pi, the student would probably say, well, yeah, as far as I know, textbook says this and so forth. And then you say, well, I'm going to now present something else. And you finish with whatever that is. Presumably, let's say in this example, it's the pi discussion. And at the end you say, the bubble discussion, you end up saying, again, is this one true? And now you've got the students starting to dialogue, maybe amongst themselves, and going back and forth between these two presentations. And then I think, just like Bucky surmises, that as they go through that dialogue, the answer will emerge, and the answer will be will come from them. And whatever it is that they decide, they're going to say that that they've now sorted out what they think the answer is. We might assume that out of this particular kind of discussion, they will come out and say, well, I think the bubble presentation is truer than the pi presentation. But the important thing, which I think this is what Joe gets at a lot of times, is that you're not telling them in the regurgitation sort of requirement. You're allowing them to come up with the answer. And if the answer turns out to be wrong, again, in the spirit of Bucky's educational system, that just opens the door for the mistake to be discovered and then come back and correct it in whatever way they want to correct it. And so you begin to get this trial and error process unfolding, and the students are really in charge of it. The instructor isn't. The instructor's facilitating the dialogue. So there, yeah, that's it's making that whole idea clearer for me in terms of how you use Socratic questioning to facilitate the discovery of something that's going to be true or relevant to the culture or the individual. Yeah, this is, I mean,
Cool.
again, it's amazing what we'll get out of 3 or 4 paragraphs read amongst, at this juncture, 3 of us, as opposed to each of us reading it individually
Yeah.
and coming up with far less than what the 3 of us have come up with out of the sort of collective communal reading of the 3 or 4 paragraphs.
Absolutely. And of course, Bucky explains that the brain stores. So if I'm reading alone, I'm reading the words and they're just connecting with my past. This, by sharing, each of us shares something that sparks the imagination, the possibility.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
We come out of our storage into the realm of what's possible.
Mm-hmm.
And although I may think that you're full of BS, at least I'm considering a possibility. And I'll remember next time I'll say, Richard was always right about this.
Oh, then you're applying, yes, the compassion that Joe was talking about a few minutes ago to learn how to be have some compassion for the person that can't read the map correctly.
Exactly right.
Yeah, you're hitting on something really, really deep. It was what I kind of referred to a little bit earlier. And this is just, yeah. And I'll just say really quickly, it's, kind of this idea where, sometimes people always question whether this idea of virtue is really always beneficial, and not manage yourself to the outcomes of things. I had a moment and I was maybe a little bit busy, and but it was something where, my mother who doesn't necessarily is having some struggles with understanding what reality is. And, but I stopped and listened, right? And I listened, and she was happier for it. I was happier for it. And later in the week, she, without even, kind of even alluding to that moment, but was expressing gratitude for that, had asked me if something had actually occurred. And the reason I'm saying is that here I was, I thought I was doing her a favor by stopping. And truthfully, she was doing me a favor by making me stop. And so that's where what I'm pointing to is that we often think maybe we're doing a favor for someone else, and really they're doing the favor for us.
Right.
So that's kind of really the important point to recognize when we're stopping and listening. Because there are a couple different feedback loops, right? There's a feedback loop that we're talking about when we're trying to build something or maybe engineer something. And then there's the feedback loop about reminding us what really matters in life. And so either way, that you're going to get something out of somebody. So it's important not to get caught up in our own narratives.
Cool beans. Okay, we won't play that link. And here's Google, and here is, oh my gosh, where'd it go? Okay, there it is. Sorry. Okay. Is that where we left off?
Yeah, we left off at unfortunately.
Okay, cool. Good.
You want
Next
to read?
coming off. If you care to read.
Sure. Unfortunately, the issue is not that easily resolved. We shall not ever completely escape the brain-teasing presence of irrational numbers. For example, the construction of the simplest polygrams with carefully measured unit length edges frequently produces irrational diagonals. The distance between non-adjacent verticals in a regular pentagon is the irrational number known as the golden section, which we shall see again in chapter 11. And the diagonal of a square is incontrovertibly 2
Square root of 2, probably.
Yeah, square root of 2. However, in actual, I can't say, Steve, can you move your thing?
Actual construction.
Yeah. A finite approximation can be determined according to the specific limitations of available measuring instruments. That numerical fractions must terminate is a consequence of investigating verifiable experience rather than theoretical relationships. Just as architects do not work with irrational length 2x4s, measurements obtained through operational procedure are necessarily real. Finally, Bucky's dismissal of these troublesome values calls attention to the granular.
Oh, sorry.
Construction of physical reality, as described in the following section. Finite accounting system. You cannot have a fraction of an energy event, philosophizes Bucky. Science progressive subdivision ultimately reaches indivisible particles, which means that reality consists of whole numbers of energy events. Therefore, we need models that will demonstrate the concept of structures consisting of discrete or countable units. In synergetics, area and volume are presented as quantities that can be counted, as opposed to measured and described as a continuum. Area is associated with the whole number of events on the surface, while volume is tallied as the number of events throughout a system. Chapter 8 will examine how sphere packing models illustrate the associative. I can't say. Association of a volume and surface area with discrete units. Chapter 10 will discuss the concept of volume in general and its role in synergetics.
Okay, so what did you just read, Joe?
Well, with the finite accounting system, we're talking about the how we're dividing
discrete
things up.
countable units. Yeah, discrete countable units.
Right. And you cannot, well, let's just start even, you cannot have a fracture of an energy event. Right. So this is a really important point. In other words, you can't focus on the part, there's a whole. That's the way I interpret that. So in what we
Well, just
have been
hang on
doing
to that for a sec. Before we go to the parts, etc., the whole, it's interesting for me that he's saying where is that phrase? Up above a bit. So he's saying structures that are consisting of discrete or countable units, not measurements.
Yeah, that's below that. Yeah.
And so that's very interesting in terms of giving emphasis on countability, as in numbers, as opposed to trying to measure that event, and just count it. And then we get to, I think, what again Joe talks about quite a lot, is that by counting the numbers and knowing the interconnection sort of possibilities, we'll get to a pattern. And in some senses, I think there's more merit in discovering the pattern and seeing how all of those things interconnect than it does to try and measure them in some kind of concrete way, which seems to be what we're so preoccupied in research, is to eventually be able to measure something rather than address the pattern of something.
Correct. Well, and this is kind of where let's just go to the actual, kind of meaning, is that if you're looking at even how to determine change, in particular, you can't just look at something in a fractured way. You have to actually be able to assess the event itself, and within the context of the circumstances as at a point in time.
But what I hear you saying, though, is that there's a discrete unit, and you can't put a measure on that, because it'll be a fractured measure. So just put the unit. The unit becomes the whole in that sense, and you don't try and measure it out. And then you, as you say, then you add another unit, and you see the pattern that starts to emerge in between those units. So the unit is really being treated as a whole energy event.
Correct. And well, so I think that this is actually a very good example would be the medical profession, especially in the West, I would say. So that the idea that, I'm coming to the doctor, I'm getting sick. The ability for me to be able to really determine the cause is very limited. However, what I am is I'm treating the fact that you're sick. And so you're not treating the whole person. You're just treating the illness. So the events that actually had led up to that person's illness, whatever it may be, isn't corrected. So the person didn't get sick in this, kind of in this fractured event. It was a, they could have caught something, that's, that may be true and at a particular moment in time, but I'm just saying, like, if you're just, you're sick and you're coming back to the doctor repeatedly, there's a pattern that's emerging.
Yeah, that
So
you
that-
see, and
that's the point.
what's interesting though is, just for fun, you talked about the sickness in the event, and then you added a few more things, and then just now you introduced the word pattern, and
Right.
and when you described it, since 2 sentences earlier, I was already hearing you say pattern without actually saying.
That's what I'm saying is that, doctors don't treat
what I'm
patterns.
getting at, so what I'm getting at is that the doctor doesn't treat a pattern of events.
No.
They try and narrow it down to a separated, discrete event. Yeah, they treat the part.
They treat the part. They don't treat the event. Or they don't treat the pattern. So this is why people that have, kind of behavioral tendencies that actually are not necessarily beneficial to them, the doctor doesn't correct that. So, and this is where they say, this is coming back to the ideas of words. It's not healthcare, it's health management.
Yeah, they don't treat
you're managing the person's health. You're not necessarily caring for the individual. So that distinction is where you're looking at something that's fractured.
I think the main point you're getting at is that if we start talking the language, like, again, for me, what you're doing is we're taking the nodes or the events, and we're taking our knowledge of the relationship between them, and you can't have one without the other type of thing. And so what you're doing for me at this point is in a sense helping me say, I have to change, or if I was a doctor, to maybe saying the same thing, I have to start using the paired words. I have to start talking about patterns of events rather than just the event that might be causing the illness, and then I try and fix it. And I may still have to do that, but I come at it through the pattern of events that leads up to this, rather than looking at that singular cause that might have led up to it. Is that fair to use the language?
In a way, yes. So this is also coming back to what Amy was saying earlier with the different types of technologies and giving us insights. So as we're able to create digital twins, and you're able to model what the individual is and some of the patterns and some of the meta patterns that are actually starting to take place, then you're able to, kind of get down to a personalized level. However, you could easily make the argument, and people do, as if you go to a holistic doctor now, if you go to a doctor now that is actually asking you about your diet, that's asking you about your patterns and behaviors, and that are trying to correct that, that's somebody that's actually trying to make That's health care. That's somebody that's actually trying to get
Yeah,
you to a
but
point
but
where
they're
you're
not trying.
healthy.
They're not trying to get you to correct that. They're trying to get you to rearrange the pattern in a way that the interconnections work differently.
Or to
Uh,
that work for you. I mean, so
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
so in the sense that everybody's a little bit different, but here's the thing is that you're treating the behavior and the pattern, not necessarily the illness. You're trying to get out in front of the illness. You're trying to prevent the illness from
Yeah,
occurring.
you're trying to deal with the pattern.
Correct, as opposed to dealing with just the part.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so if you're dealing with the part, I come in, I'm sick. Okay, well, you're getting sick because, let's just say
Yeah,
you're
no,
drinking all the time.
I understand all that. But
Yeah.
the other thing you just did in terms of the context of this, our dialogue, is that you use the word insight. And all of a sudden it says to me, that's interesting. Insight is like kind of going to the root. And
Mhm.
and the other word that, again, coming out of our discussion would be to say, doing the same kind of process, but what I end up with is not insight. I end up with in pattern. It's a strange word, but that's what I actually end up. I end up being able to see the pattern rather than the sight, like a discrete sight. So I don't know whether I'm just playing on the word, sight.
It's an interesting concept. I mean, I would just look at it the word from the idea of the word in, because you look in to act out, right?
Yeah,
So this is
do
and
you
so
look
that is,
into a sight or do you look into a pattern?
well, if you see something, you're able to identify it. So it's a sense, right? So you have an
Oh, wait a minute.
insight.
Wait a
right?
minute. When I see something, my brain just sticks some stuff together to remind me, am I seeing something or am I seeing a pattern, which I have labeled as a something? In other
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
I'm
yeah.
seeing
But
an energy event. I'm seeing an energy event to which I've given a label, and my brain assumes it's a thing. But it's
but
not
if
a
you're look, but
Go
what
ahead.
if you're looking inward?
Well, you're looking in, this is interesting because
Same
it's
thing.
insight and outside. In meditation, the whole invitation is to look in and get insight. And so, if I'm gonna be Nassim Harmin, I'm gonna say that the fourth dimension is inside and outside the three-dimensional reality. So I will look into a fourth dimension within me. And that's where I get my insight so that I can understand and interpret 3D reality better. I don't know. I don't know if there's a right answer to this, Joe. I'm saying, just as Richard said, the very use of the words invite further scrutiny.
Exploration. No, to see if
Yeah,
they actually capture what we're trying to accomplish, right? Well,
exactly.
by essentially the word. No,
Yeah,
Right.
and how much
I
mud do
get
I have
that.
on
Yeah.
my shoes when I start walking in the room, right? Because
Right.
if I have muddy shoes, I walk through the room, pretty soon that floor is muddy. We don't know what room I'm in.
No, no. And again, what does it mean even to say that I was blind and now I can see?
Yeah. And when I
So
Yeah,
see,
this idea is step into the
and when
light.
I and when I see, am I seeing a thing or am I seeing an energy event pattern which I have labeled as a thing?
yeah,
Right.
yeah.
And so it's this idea that you're, again, identifying a pattern. And this is the thing that is actually kind of unique to humans. And I would say language is actually essential is to this, right? It's a subject-object relationship too.
Yeah.
You're calling on the self, you're referencing the self, you're actually able to make an inference about yourself and then change the behavior to something that is then beneficial.
Oh,
And
and
so
again,
that
I really find it interesting that in a sense you kind of slide back in like to the self, um, when you're really talking about the self interconnected with some other things.
sure, there's no other without the self.
So
I mean,
there's the
there's no
pattern.
self. Yeah, there's no self
Yeah,
without
right,
other. I mean, so
right.
there's no self without other, but there is this idea of self. So in other words, it's like saying
Oh yeah, the idea
there's an up.
is
Well, there's a down too. Right. Yeah. So of course, yeah, there's an up and a down, but and they're in relationship to one another. I was actually even talking to somebody about this who was lifting weights the other day. He said, is this from emotion? I said, yeah, it's emotion. It's emotion up, and then there's emotion down. And yeah, you can say that you can't have one without the other, and they're in relationship to one another, but you can't say that they're the same thing either.
No,
So,
but the
so that
important thing to me is that if there's an up, there's a pattern connected to the up that's quite different than the pattern that's connected to the down.
yeah, sure, yeah,
And
absolutely. So
and
that
so
that differentiation, that lack of sameness, that
so you've
that
got the two, you've got the pattern sort of differences as opposed to a separate sort of event or entity difference.
correct.
So
Sure,
up is,
sure.
there's a pattern around up and there's a pattern around down. Yeah, that's
That's right. And there's like there's a pattern around the self, and there's a pattern around the everyone else. And
yeah.
the key is that we and I would getting back to what I was trying to say is that about language itself, what language enables is to understand the self so that we can alter the behavioral patterns that we have. And so that this is where we're talking about this idea of change. And change is enabled by something like language because it brings into our consciousness something that we had not previously considered or would have considered. And just as we were just talking a moment ago, it's the dialogue that we have that brings us something deeper when we're reading this book. So when we're going back and forth with one another, we're actually bringing something in our conscious that we would not necessarily bring in by ourselves. But this is all on the basis of language.
But the reason that's happening is because there isn't just three selves. There's there's the connection between them, and they can be one way or they can be reciprocal. So we're either looking at just a static three that constitutes the triangle, or we're looking at doubling that because I communicate with you, you communicate with me, and then with Steve and back and forth. So again, all I'm trying to get into my head is that no matter how we sort of frame all this, we're talking about a thing like self and a connection with something else that makes it a minimum pattern.
Correct.
And
but
we haven't been taught to talk patterns. We've been taught to talk events, or we are taught to talk about the self and learn about its behaviors, and then we talk about changing the behavior. But instead of changing well, it's not instead of, but sometimes you change the behavior, but other times you need to look at whether or not, do we change the behavior, or do we change the connection between? Do we change something else in the pattern? And if we change that, then the behavior doesn't have to change in some cases.
So
that's what I'm getting at, is that there's an adjustment either on the interconnection or the node or the unit that's at the other end, or one of the ends.
And maybe this is the stoic in me that's kind of coming out for a moment here, is that kind of what do we have control over? So, we don't have control over someone else's patterns. We have a control over our patterns. So, I mean,
we do. We actually do have some of it, because we're in the
Well,
pattern with them. And so
correct. Yeah,
by
that we can
changing,
change, but what we can change is the input for the individual. We can't change the individual
no, yeah,
because I mean, and
but you're
that's where.
avoiding the talk about changing the relationship.
Oh no, I'm
It,
not saying that the relationship doesn't change because the relationship would fundamentally change by the way we
no,
respond.
but that's not my point. I understand what you just said. My point is that we don't look at the connection between and the two events or the two selves, and then we sort of begin to think, well, should the self change in order to affect the relationship, or should we do something that changes the relationship that then may allow the two selves to stay unchanged? Because now the way in which they're connected is enough different that they can remain themselves, so to speak. That's what I'm.
Well,
So we look at the pattern or the connection as well as the event in deciding what needs to get changed.
sure. And I think one of those things that's really important to think about is that I think we always, when we're talking about relationships, the number one thing is the reason relationships break down is because people go into a relationship seeing what they are going to get out of it as opposed to what they're going to give. And what they're going to give is the only thing they actually control. So in other words, it's
Again,
like how
your focus is on the nodes.
correct. So you're focused on the relationship, on how you're going to service someone else,
No,
not necessarily.
you keep talking about focusing on the nodes, and you use the language of relationship, and this has been my nemesis with my profession. It says that we focus on relationships, and it turns out it's rhetoric, because we do exactly what Steve is saying. We turn relationships into things, and then we
Oh,
try and change the thing.
I wouldn't say that. No. So I think
No,
what we,
I'm saying
yeah.
that's what's happening, and I'm
Oh, I
also
do. I think that
I'm
people.
challenging you a little bit
Oh
along
no,
the
I like
line
it.
of saying that you understand patterns, but then when you talk about it, you for me anyway, I feel you slide into
That's yeah. I know that's your
talking about the
interpretation, but
node.
I think it's really important to kind of look about it and look at it in terms of when you look at it in terms of what you're going to give to the other, you're no longer looking at the object that actually ties you together. So I would say, in the sense that I'm not looking at when I do something, I'm not looking at what I'm getting out of it per se, other than the fact that there's that relationship that is being created by the act.
Yeah,
You're muted, Steve.
I'm going to insert this because it sounds to me like you're kind of defending your point of view. Richard is not criticizing your point of view or questioning your
No,
point.
I didn't think he was. I think he's challenging me
in terms of what?
to
What's he
think
challenging?
about it differently in the terms of the way I'm referring to things. That's
He challenged you that
which is good.
You're talking about the right topic, and the words you are using go back to the old paradigm, and you
Correct.
put those words into this conversation. Richard's pointing out, hold it, there's clearer language.
Right. And I see it, and this is where I sometimes I think that it's a both end. Like there's looking at the
But see,
pattern.
it is both and. It is both and. I think Richard would agree. But the point is,
Okay.
how do you change your words so that you can communicate what you're saying in a way without the mud?
Okay.
So it's all about lexicon. It's all about the language I'm using to make sure I'm not perverting the paradigm, because Richard may, and I may sit here and say, yeah, I understand what Joe is saying. He's talking about the relationships, but the language you're using, if somebody else were sitting here that wasn't part of this conversation, they would think you're talking about what they already understand. So I think the invitation here is just to check your language.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Okay.
the other thing is that what it's doing for me is it's surfacing the frustration that I have with my discipline,
Yeah.
that uses the rhetoric of the importance of relationships, and then doesn't know how to, like, again, I love this idea of how we take nodes and relationships, and saying that they're both important, like the suspension bridge thing and the tensegrity thing. And yet
Mhm.
somehow or another, we've been ingrained with the idea that we turn everything into a thing. And so we turn relationships into a thing instead of understanding them as relationships that are connected to things or these energy events.
Yeah, I mean,
And I'm not saying that's
Yeah.
what you're doing there, but I'm just saying that what you are doing is you're surfacing the bloody frustration that I have with my discipline that keeps trying to argue that we are relationship centered,
Yeah.
when in the rhetoric we are, but in practice we turn the relationship into a thing, and so we become thing centered, thinking we're relationship centered.
Let me
just
say
really
it a
quickly.
different way. Let me
Yeah.
say it a different way. I really cannot know the node. I really cannot know you. I really
Right.
cannot know your mother or my mother. I can't know. All I can do is interpret the interrelationship I have with you, the interrelationship that I have with my mother. And then my brain wants to say, oh, this interrelationship is describing the thing. It's not describing the thing. The thing is unknowable. My brain wants to take the interrelationship and make it into a thing. If I
Correct.
triangulate onto a thing, I go, well, here's one point of view, here's another point of view, here's another point of view. I think I've described the thing, and I haven't. I've described 3 interrelationships. And my brain wants to make that the thing.
That's correct. And
Okay,
I
good.
understand that part. That part's
Good.
clear to me.
Well, good. And so all Richard is saying is that your language doesn't necessarily reflect your awareness of that concept.
All right. I mean,
It might serve you to come back and listen to this recording again.
yeah, I think it would, because I think I will have to come back and listen to this, because I think
your
that this is
points are all
something.
well taken.
Because I do think that there is some with specific references to the self.
Right.
That's the ones that I kind of need to kind of come back to, that
My
self-referential.
suggestion would be to wait for 2 or 3 weeks so that you're not emotionally attached. I can't remember this conversation. If I listen to it tomorrow, I'll still hear what I was saying today. But if I wait for 3 weeks and have a bunch of other stuff going on, then I can come back and be much more objective about what I'm saying. So Richard wasn't arguing your point of view. He was, at least for me, pointing out that you sound like
I'm not
his
saying it
colleagues.
was.
You sound like his colleagues who are missing the point. You may be getting the point, but his colleagues.
But the words themselves aren't capturing the concepts.
That's right.
As you perceive them.
Yeah.
So I mean, and that's just what I'm saying, is that, so there's that aspect of it, right?
Yeah, but see, even in that, Joe, most humbly, you sound defensive, and this is not like.
No, I mean that. I don't mean to be. No, I don't mean to be. It's like, but that it's a valid point, though, right?
Have you heard me and Manu sometimes?
Sure.
Me and Manu will go after it, and I say to Manu, well, what did you just say? And he never says the same thing twice. He always comes up with another thing. And then I say, well, what did you just say? And he won't tell me what that is again. So he constantly misses the point of the point. I learn a lot when I talk to Manu because he has ways to explain things, but I can never go back and say, what did you say right there? He doesn't come back to that.
Right. And I don't mean to sound defensive, but I mean, this is part of dialogue too.
The word but is a defensive word. I don't mean to sound defensive, but
it is well, I mean, but there, yes, it is. I mean, look, if I make, well, it would always, but is it always, but it's always a defensive if you're explaining yourself.
I don't think so.
I do. I wouldn't make the distinction that it wouldn't be. I mean, now there are varying emotions that go into that. I mean, essentially, where if you're you know, if the anger comes up, that's different, right? That's a different form of defense than it would be if I'm defending the concept from a point of view of truth. Then yeah, but nonetheless, it would still be the defense of an idea. I mean, that's my thought. And like even words like I'm not going to go into it, but even the idea of rhetoric itself is not a bad thing. It's
No,
actually
it isn't
known
a
as
bad thing.
it's a
And
defense. It's a defense mechanism, actually.
I know,
And that's
and
what it traditionally is known
and
as.
in this group, there's no need to be defensive at all.
No, that's right. But
Yeah, I have
I'm
a
saying
point
at
of
any
view.
time, yeah, yeah. But anytime I would be saying that would be I would say creative destruction. That's something that would lead to a creative destruction, meaning that the doing away of one concept and replacing it with another based off the dialogue that we would have is
Well,
always
that's
going to be
hopefully
in defense, right?
no, not always. And
That's what I thought.
that would be the point of my point, is that there's no need to be defensive ever. And Richard said he understood your point of view. And what brings up for him is when he talked to his colleagues, their language is muddies the water, because they identify the thing as the relationships they've been able to identify. And they take those relationships, make it a thing, and say, that's this person. It's not that
Yeah,
person. It's the way they are interrelating to that person. And then the
correct.
brain sees a pattern and says, oh, that's a thing. There are no things.
Oh no, I get that part. No, that part I get.
Cool.
So
Yeah, I just, I mean, again, going back to my discipline, that is, I mean, I blame Bucky that if he hadn't screwed up my thinking, then
you would have been getting along with your colleagues.
I'd be getting along with my colleagues, and it wouldn't matter whether
You are at a conference, though, it should be noted.
No, well, these colleagues here are, they're not a problem. It's my old colleagues or my students. And again, all I'm getting at is that quite honestly, the discipline is correct, even in the way they set it up, that it is focused on relationships. And where the rhetoric comes in is they don't understand Fuller in the sense of realizing that the focus concept is correct, but then without really knowing, they turn it into a node, a thing. And when I watch it and see that happen, then I'm saying, you are still thing-centered, and you've taken this relationship thing, turned it into a thing, and then you try and argue that you're relationship-centered. And that's when I say it's rhetoric, because if they were following Fuller, they would be able to stay tuned into the relationship when you need to tune into that. And they would then be able to tune into either side of the relationship when they need to tune into that. And they would have the two of them working together, as opposed to always trying to turn what is actually a part of the pattern. They would turn it into a thing, which is another thing in my discipline. I'm looking at is that they teach methodologies. They don't teach what you talk about so often, and that's the pattern. They don't teach the pattern that then helps you decide what the methodology might be. They're more like the medical doctor that says, let's identify the thing that's wrong, and then we'll put a methodology.
Right.
And
That's a good example.
Yeah. And so that's when you get, take the pill and come see me in 2 weeks,
Correct.
rather
That's exactly
than
what it is.
looking at the pattern and even turning it back to the person a little bit about, is there something in the pattern, either the pattern connections or the pattern nodes that might be changed. And so you're looking at both the interconnection change possibility, or you're looking at maybe the nodes are the change, which is what you were getting at with the idea of if we understand something about the person, then that may help them decide that maybe a certain behavior should be changed. And if that behavior changes, then it may change the relationship. And so in that sense, it's almost like and again, I'm thinking of my discipline, but it's almost like you treat the relationship as a constant, and it's what the nodes on the other end do that will adjust the relationship. Whereas I think it's possible to change the relationship that then will change the nodes or allow the nodes to be just what they are. And
I love
again, I
that.
go back to my discipline.
Right.
My discipline, my teasing in about different disciplines, social work, if you are dealing with relationships, then we're just trying to figure out a way to get that relationship adjusted so that if you want, two crazies can live together in harmony. Where the psychologist is going to look at the head of each of them and decide whether or not they're going to fix the head on one or maybe two, but their idea is to fix the thing, where the social work people are supposed to be changing the interplay pattern. So the psychologist is trying to get you sane, and the social worker doesn't give a damn as long as the two insanes are having a good time and they're not screwing up the rest of the the neighborhood kind of thing.
Right. So I love this conversation, and I'm very honored, in fact, that we speak the truth so boldly and with love, and realizing that it's probably 1:30 in
Oh,
Newfoundland.
right. Yes.
It's
No, it's
1:30 in
2:30
Newfoundland.
there.
It's
No.
quarter to 3.
Yeah, they're a half an hour weird.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I thought it was just an hour difference.
No, it's something
No,
like
No,
an hour and a half.
you're an hour to Atlantic time, and then Newfoundland time is a half hour past that. So it's an hour and a half from you.
Yeah. So realizing that as late as it is, and we've had such a great discussion, maybe it's time to wrap it up. Let me just make sure where we left off here. We finished this paragraph, right? Or not?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, which way is up is where we
It's
are.
hard to get used to. Okay, good. So we're going to start off with
Oh,
which
wait a
way?
minute. Hang on. The finite accounting system. No, keep going up.
Yeah, I think we
The
here
role. No,
this was the
we're
last
there.
one.
Yeah,
All
yeah,
right,
yeah.
we're there.
So we're at
So when we
Oh.
start, we're going to start at we're not. So at the top of page.
yeah. No, because actually I was thinking about the finite accounting system is a really important part during that whole thing. Is
Right.
that yeah, I've been having conversations about the idea of a triple bottom line, but even the finite accounting system and the cosmic accounting system and how that actually relates to one another. That's a really important point
All right.
that I think Bucky actually has to offer quite a bit in that area in particular.
Okay, good. Okay, so Richard, how you feeling, and what are your takeaways tonight?
Well, now I can say I'm feeling tired
After dancing,
after dancing. Yeah.
and not just with me.
Exactly.
Well, it's, just to stay on that for a minute, this particular group that's here is, basically 90% women. It's usually a bit more of a balance. But when I was working with youth in a group home kind of environment, it was with 60 young women, teenagers, and the only man on the campus was the school principal and myself. And the kids were able to organize dances, but it was run by Catholic sisters, and because they're worried about boyfriends trying to bring in drugs or whatever it might be, it was no boys allowed, no boyfriends, and so these kids were dancing, but they were happy to dance with each other, but they also, you know, the idea of being able to dance with a male was there as well. So it turned out the principal and I would be standing basically in the middle of the gymnasium, taking turns dancing with as many kids as they were wanted. And at the end of the evening, we were absolutely exhausted. And so next time we had sort of a board level meeting, I said, this has got to change because the two of us are going to drop on the dance floor. So we got to figure out a way to let the boys come so they can do the dancing.
I was
And
training for this conference now.
Yeah. And then we had and then we brought in, we were allowed to bring in, again, local youth bands. And again, these are kids that are trying to become a band. And some of them were pretty good, but some of them were horrible. And then you had 3 hours of listening to this god-awful band in a closed sort of gymnasium environment, and all these noise. So anyway, it just kind of connected to because the fun that I had tonight was dancing with as many people as I could. Part of it is because I've been the leader of the organization, and I stick around for the events and to sort of, you know, model that I'm just one of you, you know, so I'll get up in the dance floor too. I'm not sort of this stick in the mud sort of guy that's supposed to be the elder or whatever it is. So some of them are rather surprised that they had an 83-year-old up there rocking and rolling.
Cool.
Anyway, so I'm complete and I'm ready to get a little bit of sleep for the 7:30 meeting that I got.
Jeez.
And I'm doing exactly what Joe said at the very beginning, that when you get into these conference environments, it's amazing the adrenaline or the energy that you can survive on. And then, you know, when you go home or something, you crash. But yeah, thanks for that reassurance or that
Reminder.
reminder that these things really juice up the energy on you. And it's good because you want to get every minute of the experience you can. So I don't want to sleep it away.
Right.
So anyway, how are you feeling in your takeaway, Joe?
I'm feeling great. I mean, you know, again, I think that having these dialogues is actually again, you know, they're dynamic, and it's the reason we kind of get together. And I think that listening to ourselves, meaning the words that I'm saying, and having somebody being able to remind you of the words that that I'm saying, you know, one of the I'll admit, I guess aversions that I have is listening to myself. And so having somebody kind of remind me of the words that I am using is pretty much the best way for me to learn, primarily because of my lack of courage. So, and that courage is to listen to myself on video. So from that perspective, again, that's I'm taking that away. So there's an element of gratitude there. I'm gonna defend my words, but that's okay. It's no, it's I think understanding how important words are,
Yeah.
and using them properly, using the proper tenses, even using the proper tones. You know, these are all very, very important things, and I think that they have actually more relevance than they've had in recent years, I would say, many years, because of the ability for tools now, as we getting back to the text, the tools for modelability and the ability to kind of capture reality, and the integrity of our words are actually going to be more meaningful than they've ever been before.
Yeah, I agree.
So I think that that's something that's really important. So these types of conversations are unique. They're certainly not going to be something that we can have pretty much any other place. Very few places. So I mean, my takeaway is to be grateful for the interactions, mindful of the modelability, thinking about things, and now coming up with cosmic accounting, but things in terms of being fractured and non-fractured. Looking at how we're looking at events and patterns. And most importantly, looking at the inputs into the patterns that we control. So, Steve, how do you feel? What are you taking away from today?
Well, I'm honored and overwhelmed, and I'm feeling as tired as though it were 1:30 for me, and it's only 11:30, or close to 2 o'clock now for me, and it's only 11:30. I've got some great stuff down here. While we were talking, I looked up, because we were talking about language. A chimpanzee named Pansy learned 130 words, could recognize 130 words. Washu could recognize 132, and actually could verbalize 390 different vocal sequences. Kanzi, a bonobo, could understand 3,000 words, and actually could create 2- and 3-word sentences that was equal to a 3-year-old human being. Coco, a gorilla, learned 1,000 signs of ASL and understood 3,000 words. And it seems to me that this whole ability is conceptualization. And maybe the very thing that makes me smarter than a gorilla, the fact that I can create things, I can put things together and create things and trick my brain, is the reason why I'm so damn intelligent. And of course, that's the reason why I'm not intelligent, because I think there are things, you know. I love this idea of energy events, and I got some good ideas for my book here on, because I have a whole section on extreme speech and how critical it is, having studied neuro-linguistic programming and finding out that most people will tell you what their problem is and not even hear themselves. And most people reinforce their problems by speaking the same words over and over again regarding the paradigm, and the words don't change the relationship. How the heck can I change my relationship with myself if I'm using the same words over and over again? So I just it was all mind-blowing for me. I'm grateful to listen to the interchange, and I won't be here next week or the week after. So Joe, it would be critical if you and I got together, and maybe if you used, I don't know if you're using Mozilla or Edge, use a browser you haven't used before, and use that, and let's log in to Zoom. And then that way you can go into that browser and just log in as me, and you don't have to remember any passwords, because it'll remember you. But let's get together Monday or Tuesday, so that Wednesday morning, even though I will be here,
Monday.
you can still, let's get together. Oh, Monday's better than Tuesday for you?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Let's pick a time. Let's text. Because Wednesday morning, even though I'm here, I'd love to have you log in and make sure that everything's rolling. Because if you can log in Wednesday morning, then you can go Saturday, Wednesday, and Saturday, because for the next 3 meetings, I won't be here.
Cool.
Cool beans. All right, my dear friends, how honored I am. Boy, Richard, I'm so grateful that you have a constitution at 83 years old that keeps you up till 1:30 in the morning, no matter what time zone it is. 2 o'clock in the morning, no matter what time zone it is. Thank you all. Thanks, Joe.
Take care.
All right.
Thank you. Now, Steve, I'm actually looking forward to having a conversation. I was kind of reminding myself how
cool.
Yeah, we don't catch up as much as we used to.
All right, we'll text and we'll coordinate for a Monday time.
Cool.
Afternoon's best for me. See y'all.
Later.
Bye-bye.